The humid Brazilian afternoon hung heavy over the city, a thick blanket of heat that made the air in my small apartment feel like soup. I was wiping the sweat from my brow, the cold can of guarana soda a welcome relief against my palm, when my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, rattling against the formica. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from my hometown, a place I hadn't set foot in for over 5 years. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced a path down my spine, a sensation entirely separate from the oppressive heat. "Hello?" I answered, my voice echoing slightly in the sparse room. "Is this Ana?" a man's voice asked, formal and clipped. "Ana Souza?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Dr. Augusto Silva. I am a notary public in Santa Cruz. I am calling regarding the estate of your grandfather, João Souza." My grandfather. The name was a ghost, a beloved, gentle ghost that still haunted the happiest corners of my memory. The news of his passing 6 months ago was a wound that had not yet fully scarred over. I had been unable to get time off from my new job, from my life here in this concrete jungle, to make the trip back for the funeral. The guilt was a constant, low hum in the background of my thoughts. The estate? I don't understand. My uncle, Carlos, he handled everything. He told me it was all settled. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with the weight of unspoken words. I could hear the rustle of paper, the deliberate, slow sound of a man choosing his next words with immense care. "Ms. Souza, there is a matter that requires your personal attention. A document has come to light. It was your grandfather's explicit instruction that it be presented to you, in person, should a specific set of circumstances occur." "What circumstances?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. The cold from the can was now seeping into my skin, a deep chill that had nothing to do with the beverage. "I am not at liberty to discuss this over the phone," Dr. Silva said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is a matter of some sensitivity. I must urge you to come to my office as soon as you are able." The request felt like a trapdoor opening beneath my feet. My uncle Carlos had been the one to call me with the news of my grandfather's death. His voice had been choked with what I had assumed was shared grief. He had told me, in no uncertain terms, that everything was being taken care of, that the fazenda, the sprawling, beautiful farm that was my childhood paradise, was a financial burden, that the taxes were crippling, and that the only sensible thing to do was to sell it. He'd promised me a small share, to help me get on my feet in the city. I had been too numb, too grief-stricken, to question him. He was family. He was my Tio Carlos, who used to carry me on his shoulders through the mango groves. I booked a flight for the next day. The journey was a blur of sterile airport air, the dull roar of jet engines, and the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The plane descended through clouds, and suddenly the endless urban sprawl of my current life was replaced by the familiar, patchwork quilt of green and red earth that defined my home state. The moment I stepped off the plane, the air hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the processed, chilled air of the city, but a living, breathing entity, thick with the scent of wet earth, jet fuel, and the faint, sweet perfume of distant blooming trees. It was the smell of my past. I rented a car, a beat-up sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant, and began the 2-hour drive to Santa Cruz. The paved highway soon gave way to a familiar red dirt road, its surface rutted and uneven from the last rain. The car jolted and bounced, the red dust pluming up behind me, coating the windows in a fine, rusty film. On either side, the world opened up into an immense tapestry of green. Emerald green pastures dotted with grazing white cattle stretched out to meet a sky so vast and blue it felt like a dome. In the distance, the dark, jagged line of the forest stood sentinel. The sound of the tires crunching on the gravel was a rhythm from my childhood, a lullaby I had forgotten. I rolled down the window, letting the warm, humid wind whip through my hair, carrying with it the symphony of home, the buzzing of innumerable insects, the distant lowing of a cow, the raucous call of a sarima bird. It was all so beautiful, so alive. And according to my uncle, it was all gone, sold to some faceless corporation. Santa Cruz hadn't changed. The same low, whitewashed buildings lined the main street, their tile roofs weathered to a soft orange. The same old men sat outside the bar on plastic chairs, their conversation a low, steady murmur. I drove past the town square, with its ancient church and its bandstand, and pulled up in front of a modest, 2-story building with a faded sign that read Cartorio Silva, Tabilio. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of apprehension. The notary's office was an island of cool, dim quiet, a stark contrast to the vibrant heat outside. The air was stale, smelling of old paper, lemon-scented polish, and the faint, metallic tang of a slow-turning ceiling fan. A young clerk with round glasses looked up from his desk. "Can I help you?" "I'm Ana Souza. I have an appointment with Dr. Silva." He nodded and disappeared through a heavy wooden door. A moment later, he reappeared and gestured for me to enter. Dr. Augusto Silva was a man in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that held a deep, unsettling sadness. He stood up from behind a massive, dark wood desk piled high with leather-bound ledgers and stacks of paper. The room was a testament to a lifetime of bureaucracy. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaned under the weight of countless folders, each one a container for some family's history, their joys and sorrows pressed between official stamps and signatures. "Ms. Souza," he said, his voice as grave and quiet as it had been on the phone. He gestured to a worn leather chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." I sat, my hands clenched together in my lap to stop them from trembling. The cool leather of the chair seeped through my thin cotton dress. "What is this about, Dr. Silva?" "My uncle told me the fazenda was sold. That everything was finished." Dr. Silva sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the secrets in this room. He opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a single, long envelope. It was yellowed with age at the edges. My name, Ana Souza, was written on the front in a handwriting I knew as well as my own. It was my grandfather's. The sight of his precise, elegant script sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over me. My throat tightened. "This," Dr. Silva said, placing the envelope on the desk between us with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, "is a codicil to your grandfather's last will and testament. It was executed by him 5 years ago, shortly before his health began its final decline. He gave it to me with very specific, very strict instructions." I could only stare at the envelope, my grandfather's presence feeling so palpable in the room I almost expected him to speak. "What instructions?" "He instructed me that this document was only to be delivered to you, and only if your uncle, Carlos Souza, attempted to sell the Fazenda de Esperanza without your express, written consent." Dr. Silva's eyes met mine, and in their depths, I saw the confirmation of my deepest, darkest fear. "The sale was finalized 3 days ago. The new owners, an agricultural conglomerate from Sao Paulo, take possession in 1 month." The world tilted. The hum of the ceiling fan seemed to grow louder, morphing into a high-pitched whine in my ears. The smell of old paper suddenly felt suffocating. "He sold it, without my consent." The words were ash in my mouth. The promised small share had been a lie, a pacifier to keep me quiet and far away. He had sold my inheritance, our family's legacy, the land my grandfather had poured his soul into, right out from under me. "He did," Dr. Silva confirmed, his voice soft but unwavering. "And in doing so, he triggered the conditions of this codicil. Your grandfather was a wise man, Ana. He loved that land more than anything, but he loved you more. He knew your uncle's heart. He knew his ambitions, his impatience. He feared this exact scenario." With a hand that wasn't entirely steady, I reached out and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, imbued with significance. I broke the brittle seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As I began to read my grandfather's words, his voice, his true voice, filled my mind, clear and strong as if he were sitting right beside me. Asterisk, "My dearest Ana, my little songbird, if you are reading this, then it means my fears have been realized, and my son, your Tio Carlos, has betrayed the trust one placed in him, and more importantly, the trust you placed in him. Do not be too hard on him. The hunger for a different life can make a man do terrible things. But the land, our Esperanza, must not be lost. It is your birthright, not his." Asterisk. Tears blurred the elegant script. I blinked them away, hot and salty on my cheeks. Asterisk, "The will that Carlos presented, the one that named him the sole executor and primary beneficiary, is not my true final will. It was a decoy, a document I was pressured into signing during a moment of weakness when my mind was clouded by illness. This codicil, legally witnessed and irrevocable, nullifies that document. The Fazenda de Esperanza, in its entirety, was left to you, Ana. It has always been yours. Carlos was to be your steward, to manage it and care for it until you decided to return home, where you have always belonged. The house in the city, the investments, the liquid assets, all of that was his. It was more than fair. But the land is your soul, as it was mine. It is yours." Asterisk. I looked up at Dr. Silva, my vision swimming. "He left it, to me? All of it?" "Every hectare," Dr. Silva said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "The official, binding will is also in my possession. Your uncle was aware of its existence, but he believed its conditions were different. He believed he could act before you ever found out. He was wrong." A storm of emotions raged inside me. A soaring, dizzying joy that the farm, my home, was still mine. A crushing, devastating sense of betrayal that my own flesh and blood, the man I had called Tio my entire life, had tried to steal it from me. And beneath it all, a cold, hard kernel of anger began to form. "I have to go there," I whispered, folding the letter and placing it carefully back in the envelope. "I have to see it. I have to face him." Dr. Silva nodded. "That would be advisable. The legal process to overturn the fraudulent sale will begin immediately, but it will be contentious. You should be prepared for that. I left the notary's office a different person from the one who had entered. The grief-stricken, city-weary granddaughter was gone, replaced by a woman with a purpose, a woman fighting for her home. The red dust no longer felt like a nuisance, it felt like a part of me, reclaiming me. I got back into the rental car and pointed it towards the Fazenda de Esperança, the Farm of Hope. The name had never felt more apt, or more fragile. The familiar gate, fashioned from rough-hewn eucalyptus poles, came into view. The sign, with its faded painted name, hung slightly crooked as it always had. But as I drew closer, I saw a new, sleek padlock securing the chain. My uncle's doing. A clear, physical message, keep out. I felt a fresh surge of anger. I got out of the car, the red dirt soft and warm under my sandals. I knew a place where the fence was low and the barbed wire loose, a secret passage my grandfather and I had used for our walks. I found it, exactly as I remembered, and slipped through, the thorns catching briefly on my dress before releasing me onto the land that was, by law and by love, my own. I walked for what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The land embraced me. The scent of lemongrass and horse sweat, the feel of the long, dry grass brushing against my legs, the chorus of cicadas building to a crescendo as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was all a balm and a torment. This was mine, and it had almost been ripped away. The main house came into view, a long, low-slung structure of whitewashed walls and a wide, welcoming veranda. It was where I had been born, where my mother had been born. Light spilled from the windows, and I could see figures moving inside. My heart clenched. I walked past the empty corral, past the giant mango tree whose branches had held my childhood swing, its rope now frayed and rotten, and stepped onto the veranda. The wooden planks, worn smooth by generations of bare feet, creaked a familiar greeting under my weight. I could see them through the screen door. My tío Carlos, his back to me, was standing at the head of the large wooden dining table, a glass of cachaca in his hand. His wife, Tia Maria, was setting down a platter of food, her face pinched with its usual quiet anxiety. And their son, my cousin Raphael, was slouched in a chair, staring at his phone, his face a mask of teenage indifference. They looked like a perfect, peaceful family scene. A lie. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with the scent of jasmine from the vines climbing the veranda posts and the rich, savory smell of feijoada from inside the house. I pushed the screen door open. The squeak of its hinges cut through the domestic sounds, and 3 pairs of eyes snapped towards me. Carlos turned slowly. For a split second, pure, unadulterated shock flashed across his face, followed immediately by a swift, calculating mask of warmth. Ana. Asterisco minha filha, asterisco my God, watch a surprise. He opened his arms, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. You should have called. We would have prepared a proper welcome. Tia Maria gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Ana. Oh, Querida, you're so thin. Raphael just grunted, barely looking up from his phone. I didn't move from the doorway. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel the cool night air at my back, a stark contrast to the warm, tense atmosphere of the room. I was in the neighborhood, I said, my voice deceptively calm. I had a meeting in town. With Dr. Silva. The notary. The change in my uncle's face was instantaneous. The false warmth evaporated, replaced by a wary, hardened expression. The jovial mask was gone. He lowered his arms slowly. Silva? What business could you possibly have with him? The estate is settled. I told you, I handled everything. Did you? I asked, taking a step into the room. The familiar worn floorboards felt solid beneath my feet. He showed me a very interesting document, Tio. A letter from Vovô João. Carlos's jaw tightened. He placed his glass on the table with a sharp click. Your grandfather was a sick, old man at the end. He didn't know what he was doing. He signed many papers. This one was signed 5 years ago, I said, pulling the envelope from my bag. It was witnessed by Dr. Silva and 2 of his clerks. It's quite legal. And it states, very clearly, that the Fazenda de Esperança was left to me. In its entirety. You were never the owner. You were my steward. Tia Maria let out a small, strangled cry and sank into a chair. Raphael finally looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. Carlos's face flushed a dark, angry red. That is a lie. That document is a forgery. Silva is a senile old fool who has always had it in for me. The will I have is the true will. I am the eldest son. This land is mine. The will you have is the decoy, Tio, I said, my voice gaining strength, fueled by the righteous fire burning in my chest. The one you pressured him into signing when he was on heavy medication after his stroke. Vovô knew what you were. He knew you would try to do this. He planned for it. He protected me from you. Get out, Carlos snarled, his composure shattering. He took a threatening step towards me, his fists clenched. The smell of his cachaca breath cut through the aroma of food. This is my house. You are not welcome here. You abandoned this family, you abandoned this land to go play in your big city. You have no right to come back here and make these accusations. I have every right. I shot back, standing my ground. I didn't abandon anything. I was grieving. And you used my grief to steal from me. You sold my home, Tio. You sold it without even telling me. You were going to pocket the money and leave me with nothing but a lie about a small share. The truth, spoken aloud in the heart of the home he had tried to steal, hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. Tia Maria was weeping quietly into her hands. Raphael stared at his father, a dawning horror on his young face. You are a thief, I said, the words cold and final. And I am going to fight you for what is mine. The sale is void. The lawyers will be here tomorrow. This is my land. This is my home. And you need to leave. The silence that followed was broken only by Tia Maria's sobs and the relentless, cheerful chirping of the crickets outside. The battle for the Fazenda de Esperanza had begun, not in a courtroom, but here, in the heart of the family, where the deepest wounds are always inflicted. Continua a história. The days that followed were a tense, cold war fought under the blazing sun. I did not stay at the main house. The very walls seemed to reverberate with my uncle's betrayal. Instead, I moved into the small, caretaker's cottage near the old barn, a place that had been empty for years. It was dusty and smelled of dried hay and mice, but it was mine. Cleaning it became my therapy. The scratch of the broom on the rough tile floor, the smell of soap and water, the feel of the cool, damp cloth in my hands as I wiped down the windows to let the light in, it was all a reclaiming. My uncle, for his part, became a ghost in his own home. He stayed inside the main house, brooding and furious. I would see him sometimes, a dark silhouette in a window, watching me. The only time we were forced to interact was when the lawyers arrived. A car I didn't recognize, a dusty sedan, kicked up a cloud of red dirt as it came to a stop between the house and my cottage. 2 men got out. One was Dr. Silva, looking solemn and official in a dark suit. The other was a younger, sharper-faced man introduced as Eduardo Porto, the lawyer Dr. Silva had engaged on my behalf. Carlos emerged from the house, his own lawyer, a slick, city-looking man from the state capital, trailing behind him. The two legal parties faced each other in the yard, the bright morning sun highlighting the deep lines of anger on my uncle's face. The air was thick with the smell of hot earth and impending conflict. This is nonsense, Silva. Carlos barked, dispensing with any pleasantries. That codicil is worthless. My father was not in his right mind. The medical assessments from that period, which I have here, state otherwise, Mr. Souza, Eduardo Porto replied, his voice calm and professional. He tapped his leather briefcase. He was deemed fully lucid. Furthermore, the witnesses are prepared to testify. The document is legally ironclad. The sale you orchestrated is null and void. The deposit will be returned to the buyers, and you will be facing a lawsuit for fraudulent representation. This is my land. Carlos roared, his voice echoing across the quiet pasture. A few cattle in the distance lifted their heads. I have poured my life into this dirt. And he jabbed a finger in my direction, his whole body trembling with rage. She left. She doesn't care about this place. She just wants the money. That's not true, I said, my voice quiet but carrying an intense bass. I wasn't just speaking to him, but to the land itself, to the memory of my grandfather. I care more than you can possibly imagine. You see a price tag. I see my life. The meeting devolved into a barrage of legal threats and bitter accusations, a duel of words that left me feeling drained and soiled. As the lawyers continued to argue, I turned my back and walked away. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I walked towards the river, the one that marked the western boundary of the farm. The sound of the legal battle faded, replaced by the gentle, gurgling rush of water over smooth stones. The air here was cooler, smelling of wet clay and decaying leaves. I sat on a large, sun-warmed rock and dipped my fingers into the current, the cold water a shock to my system. This was what it was all about. Not the deeds, not the money, but this, the living, breathing soul of the place. This was where my grandfather had taught me to fish, where we had swum on hot afternoons, where I had dreamed my teenage dreams. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds and smells wash over me, trying to find a center of calm in the storm. A twig snapped behind me. I turned, expecting to see my uncle, come to continue his tirade. But it was Raphael. My cousin stood a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, his shoulders hunched. He looked young and uncertain. Hey, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hey, Rafa. He scuffed the toe of his sneaker in the dirt. Is it true, he asked without looking at me. What you said? That Dad tried to steal the farm from you. I looked at him, this boy who was caught in the crossfire of his father's greed. It's true, Rafa. Vovo left it to me. Your father knew that. He tried to sell it before I could find out. Raphael was silent for a long time, watching the river flow past. He told me you were greedy, he finally mumbled. That you'd come back and try to take everything from us. That we'd be thrown out with nothing. My heart ached for him. I don't want to throw you out, Raphael. This is your home, too. It always has been. But it's my home first. It's my responsibility. Your father, he was given a house and money in the city. He was taken care of. It wasn't enough for him. He wanted it all. He's always been like that, Raphael said, his voice thick with a sadness that seemed too old for him. Never satisfied. Always talking about the potential this place has, how it's a diamond in the rough if we just sold off parcels, got big investors. He shook his head. I hate the city. I love it here. It was the first crack in the wall my uncle had built around his family. A small, fragile fissure, but a significant one. I didn't push. I just sat there, sharing the silence with my cousin, the river murmuring its ancient, indifferent song beside us. That night, as I was trying to sleep on the thin mattress I'd dragged into the cottage, I heard a soft knock on the door. I opened it to find Tia Maria standing there, holding a covered plate. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. I thought you might be hungry, she said, her voice trembling. You didn't eat at the house. I let her in. She placed the plate on the small table. It was a portion of the feijoada from the other night, along with some rice and fried manioc. The familiar, comforting smell filled the small room. Thank you, Tia, I said quietly. She didn't leave. She stood wringing her hands, a nervous habit I remembered from my childhood. Anna. I didn't know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again. I swear to you, on my mother's grave, I did not know the specifics. Carlos told me the farm was his, that it was his right to sell. He said the document your grandfather signed at the end was the true one. He said you were getting a fair share. I believed him. I looked at her honest, tormented face. Tia Maria was not a strong woman. She had always been subservient to my uncle, her life a quiet symphony of obedience and anxiety. I believed her. I know, Tia, I said, my voice softening. I know you wouldn't have been a part of this if you knew. He's so angry, she cried, the words tumbling out. So bitter. He always felt your grandfather loved you more, that he saw you as the true heir. He said a woman couldn't run a farm like this. He said it was an insult. This was his way of proving himself. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about money. It was about a lifetime of perceived slights, a deep-seated jealousy festering for decades. My grandfather's wisdom, his ability to see the true heart of people, had seen this poison in his own son. He had tried to contain it, to protect what he loved most from it. The codicil wasn't just a legal document, it was a grandfather's final, desperate act of love for his granddaughter. I hugged Tia Maria, this fragile woman caught in a storm not of her making. She clung to me for a moment, sobbing quietly, before pulling away, embarrassed. I should go. He'll be wondering where I am. After she left, I stood in the doorway of the cottage, looking up at the main house. A single light was on in my uncle's study. I could picture him in there, surrounded by the ghosts of his own resentment, plotting his next move. The battle for the land was a legal one, but the war for this family's soul was being fought in the shadows of that house, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that it was far from over. The revelation of my uncle's motive, his deep-seated jealousy, made him not just a thief, but a wounded, dangerous animal. And a wounded animal is always at its most unpredictable. Continua a história. The predictable move from my uncle's lawyer was a motion to have the codicil declared invalid based on undue influence, from Dr. Silva, a desperate and flimsy claim that Eduardo Porto dismantled with cold efficiency in a series of terse letters. The real war, however, became a war of attrition on the farm itself. Carlos, knowing his legal ground was crumbling, began a campaign of subtle sabotage. It started with the workers. Many of the hired hands, the vaqueros and farm laborers, had been with us for decades. They remembered me as a little girl, but their paychecks came from Carlos. I began to notice a change. Where once I'd receive hesitant but friendly nods, now I was met with averted eyes and silence. When I went to saddle my grandfather's old horse, Vento, I found the tack room locked, the key missing. The fuel for the generator at my cottage was accidentally siphoned, leaving me without power for a night, the darkness filled with the unnervingly close sounds of the night creatures. He was trying to isolate me, to wear me down, to make life on the farm so difficult that I would give up and go back to the city. It only made me more stubborn. I learned to do things for myself. I found an old, rusty key that fit the tack room after some searching. I started buying my own fuel and storing it in the cottage. I began waking up at dawn, just as the workers did, and walking the fences, checking the water troughs, not as their boss, but as a presence. A stubborn, unyielding presence. One afternoon, I found a section of fence along the northern pasture had been cut. It wasn't broken, the wires were cleanly snipped. It was a deliberate act. If the cattle had gotten through, they could have wandered onto the road or into a neighbor's crop field, causing thousands in damages or worse, a deadly accident. It was a move that endangered the very livestock that was part of the farm's assets. My uncle was playing a reckless game. Fury, cold and sharp, propelled me back to the main house. I didn't bother with the veranda. I marched straight to my uncle's study window and rapped hard on the glass. He was at his desk, and he jumped, spilling his coffee. He glared at me, then stood and yanked the window open. "What is it?" he snarled. "The north fence," I said, my voice trembling with controlled rage. "It's been cut." A flicker of something, not surprise, but satisfaction, crossed his face. He masked it quickly. "So? Fences break. It's an old fence." "It didn't break. It was cut. With wire cutters. If the herd had gotten out, they could have been hit by a truck. They could have been killed. Is that what you want? To destroy the value of the farm out of spite?" "Don't you dare accuse me of such a thing," he blustered, but the guilt was plain in his eyes. "You know nothing about running this place. It's probably one of the lazy hands, neglecting his duties." "We both know that's not true," I said, leaning closer, the smell of his expensive coffee and his cheap cologne turning my stomach. "This stops now, Carlos. You can try to intimidate the workers, you can try to scare me, but I am not leaving. This is my land. And I will stand on it until my last breath if I have to. You have lost. The law is on my side. Decency is on my side. All you have left is your bitterness, and it's a poison that's only hurting you and your family." For a moment, I saw it. Through the mask of anger, a glimpse of the man he might have been, the big brother I had once adored. It was a fleeting shadow of shame, of defeat. Then it was gone, swallowed by the familiar resentment. "Get away from my window," he hissed, and slammed it shut, the glass rattling in its frame. I turned away, my heart pounding. The confrontation had left me shaken but also strangely empowered. I had stood up to him, on his turf, and I had not backed down. I spent the rest of the day repairing the fence myself. My hands, soft from years of city life, were soon raw and blistered from pulling the barbed wire tight and twisting the metal clips. The sun beat down on my back, and sweat stung my eyes. It was hard, painful work, but it felt good. It felt real. I was not just claiming the land with words on a paper, I was claiming it with the sweat of my brow, just as my grandfather had. As the sun began to set, casting long, deep shadows across the land, I saw a figure walking towards me. It was Raphael. He didn't say anything. He just picked up the extra pair of wire cutters and started helping me, his young, strong hands making quick work of the section I was struggling with. We worked in silence for a long while, the only sounds the creak of the wire and the evening songs of the birds. When we were finished, he wiped his forehead with his arm. "He's wrong, you know," he said, not looking at me. "My dad. He's not the man I thought he was." "People are complicated, Rafa," I said, my voice tired. "He's your father. You don't have to hate him." "I don't hate him," Raphael said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm just disappointed. And I'm sorry. For what he's doing to you." His apology, simple and heartfelt, meant more to me than any legal victory. It was a thread of hope, a connection to the family I thought I had lost. A few days later, the formal notice arrived from Eduardo Porto. The court had reviewed the evidence and had granted a preliminary injunction. The sale of the Fazenda de Esperanza was officially frozen. The legal tide had turned, decisively and irrevocably, in my favor. I took the letter and walked to the highest point on the farm, a small hillock behind the main house that offered a panoramic view of the entire property. From here, I could see the winding river, the green pastures dotted with cattle, the dark, mysterious forest, and the red dirt road stitching it all together. The evening air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the workers' houses. In the distance, I could hear the melancholic whistle of a train, a sound that had always marked the end of the day. This was all mine. Not just the land, but the sounds, the smells, the memories, the responsibility. The weight of it was immense, but it was not a burden. It was a purpose. I heard footsteps on the dry grass behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was my uncle. His presence had a certain heavy energy. He came to stand beside me, not looking at me, but staring out at the view he had tried to sell. "You've won," he said, his voice flat and empty of all its previous fire. "It was never about winning, Tio," I said softly. "It was always about what was right." He was silent for a long time. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, setting the sky on fire. "He loved you best," Carlos finally said, the words ripped from somewhere deep and wounded inside him. From the moment you were born, it was always, Anna this, Anna that. The farm, the legacy, it was always meant for you. I was just the son who happened to be born first. The placeholder. There it was. The raw, unvarnished truth. A lifetime of living in the shadow of a little girl. He loved you, too, I said, and I meant it. He trusted you to be my steward. He gave you everything else. It was your jealousy that blinded you, Carlos. Not his lack of love. He didn't reply. He just stood there, a lonely, broken figure silhouetted against the dying light. The man who had tried to steal my future now looked like he had none of his own. The lawyers say the sale will be fully rescinded within the month, I continued, my gaze fixed on the land. The buyers are already negotiating the return of their deposit. The farm is mine, free and clear. What will you do? He asked, and for the first time, there was no malice in his voice, only a hollow curiosity. I'm going to live here, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. I'm going to run it. I'm going to make it thrive again, the way Vovo wanted. He nodded slowly, a gesture of final acceptance. And what about us? I turned to look at him then, at my uncle, my adversary, my family. The house in the city is yours, as Vovo intended. You and Tia Maria can go there. You can start fresh. Or, I took a deep breath, offering a branch across a chasm I wasn't sure could ever be fully bridged. Or you can stay here. In the main house. Not as the owner, but as family. You can help me, if you want. Your knowledge of this place, it's valuable. But the lying, the sabotage, the bitterness, it ends now. It ends tonight. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw the struggle in his eyes. The pride, the shame, the defeat, and a tiny, fragile spark of something that might have been hope. He didn't give me an answer. He just turned and walked slowly back down the hill towards the house, his shoulders slumped, his figure being swallowed by the gathering dusk. I stayed on the hill for a long time, until the stars pricked the velvet sky and the moon rose, bathing the Fazenda de Esperanza in a soft, silver light. The cicadas had begun their nightly chorus, a sound as constant as the heartbeat of the land itself. It was over. The conflict, the betrayal, the legal battle, it was finished. What remained was the land, and the complicated, wounded, but enduring bonds of family. I had my home back. And maybe, just maybe, I had begun the long, difficult process of getting my family back, too. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, it was mine to shape.